Welcome to the Pocket. I'm your host, Scooter, and today we've got our second mock draft Monday. This is the 2.0. In the first one we did, there were no trades. In this one, we're going to have trades. So this one's going to look a little bit different. But for any repeat picks, I'm going to go ahead and refer you guys to that if you want more analysis and elaboration on those picks. But other than that, we're going to have plenty to talk about in this one. So let's get right into it. So here we are on the NFL Mock Draft Simulator mock draft database. Thank you guys for making this simulator for me where I can do trades. Let's go ahead and get this thing started. First overall, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The Titans have not made a move for any quarterback this offseason so far, even though there have been some available. Yes, they have Will Levis, but I think they're ready to move on from him. Cam Ward, to me, is the undisputed number one quarterback in the draft. Most people would agree. If you don't, you can go ahead and watch my other mock draft video or my top 5 quarterbacks video where I talk more about that. But for the sake of this video, we're going to go ahead and just select Cam Ward. Now, moving on to our second pick, we have the Cleveland Browns, and this is where things truly do get quite interesting. I guess I could have said for the first overall pick that there might be a team that might want to trade up there, but I don't think anyone wants to trade up to number 1 overall. And in fact, I want to say for this whole entire draft, I think it was a really hard one to make trades for, considering the fact that there isn't as many quarterbacks, which is the position that most teams would jump at. I think a lot of teams are going to try to sit and, if anything, trade back. But the thing is, if everyone wants to trade back, then you don't have a trade partner. So with that being said, let's talk about the second overall pick. I don't really see anyone wanting to move up here for a Shedeur Sanders or even an Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, because you know that all 3 of those guys will be, at least one of them will be available over the next 3 picks, or if you're only interested in the non-QBs in the next 2 picks, you could trade up to the Giants spot. So for me, the Browns are kind of stuck here, but that's not such a bad thing. You basically get your chance to take the best player in the draft. And to me, especially considering the fact that they already signed Myles Garrett to an extension, so they have already done something about edge. And although they could have one of the most disgusting duos of all time, I think it's more important that they take who I believe is the overall best player in the draft and someone that fills potentially 2 positions of needs, and that is Travis Hunter. So I have already mocked this pick to them before, so if you really do want more elaboration, then once again, I'm going to refer you guys to that video. But like I said, I don't think Shedeur Sanders is going to be worth the second overall pick for them. I think they need to focus on building the team, and perhaps there's another way that they could get a quarterback in this draft. Maybe we'll see something about that, all right? So they're going to go ahead and take Travis Hunter with the second overall pick. Now, moving on to third overall, this is the same situation that I had the Giants in my last mock draft, and I did say this would be a great position to trade down from. Why? Well, because you're left with Shedeur Sanders, so although some people are still going to be saying the Giants have to take him here, I don't think so, unless if the trade down happens, and that's going to leave you with Abdul Carter and Mason Graham and Will Campbell. So you could maybe talk me into Will Campbell as a guy who could play all over the offensive line and really be a piece to help us out in the future, maybe after Illuminor and things like that. There's definitely some validity there. There's some validity behind Mason Graham because we don't have a run-stopping defensive tackle next to Dexter Lawrence, but I think that's way too high for a run-stopping defensive tackle. And then Abdul Carter, definitely the best player available. However, I mentioned in my last video, you could draft him and you could trade Kayvon, but you don't really know what you're going to get out of trading Kayvon. I think you could get a third-round pick, maybe even a little bit better, and that might be worth it because you could use that third-round pick to fill a different position of need where it doesn't cost quite as much. But overall, I think the sense here is that the best thing to do is actually to trade down. So when you look at the board, you're going to see a lot of these teams here are going to be okay, I think, in the spots that they're in. There's going to be blue chip talent available to them, except for after the Jets. That's where, no spoilers, I'm going to have probably the last blue chip guy in my eyes go, which means the Panthers are going to have some questions. They're going to be looking at, adding some real talent. They've got some holes on defense that they've got to address. They could use a wide receiver. But Abdul Carter is sitting right here, and they have an opportunity to trade up. So I'm actually going to have them trade with the Giants to move up to number 3 overall. And I'll explain a little bit more about why this makes sense for them, but let's just finish with the Giants for now. And for the trade calculator, I'm not sure what goes into this, but I feel this is probably even a little bit too much to give up. You see, like I could even add some fifth round picks. It's not going to let me do it. I got to add the second to make it go through. I think in reality, you're looking at more of like a first and a second, or a first and a third and a future pick. Only to move up 5 spots in the first round when you know it's not for a quarterback. But either way, I'm forcing the trade to happen, and the Giants get what they want. They move down, they acquire some value. I'm, for the sake of this video, just going to say it's a third round pick. So it's not in the first round. All right. Even that would be impossible. So the Panthers, they would have potentially had an edge rusher available to them at 8. Most likely, actually, they would have had probably their pick of the litter of, your Jason Pierces, your Shamar Stewarts and whatnot, but none of them are on Abdul Carter's level. And I think they really want this defense to take a next step. He is definitely a better pass rusher than run defender, but perhaps he could help out in that department too. And if you're still concerned about the run defense, you can definitely get a defensive tackle in the second round who can fulfill that role for you. So I think it makes sense for them to move up and get potentially the best player in this draft in Abdul Carter at pick number 3. Pretty good value. I think worth moving up for. Up next, we have the New England Patriots, who are very upset because even the slight chance that they thought they could get Abdul Carter, they were crossing their fingers for it, but it's just too bad. Whether it's the Giants or the Panthers, someone was going to move up to take them. So what do they need? Well, they kind of need almost everything. I mean, wide receiver, they added Stephon Diggs. They have some late round picks from last year who maybe could develop, but it's not there right now. So that could be considered a need. For the offensive line, that obviously needs a ton of help. They basically got to, restart, or, they're rebuilding. So they got a lot of work to do there. And then the defense, they spent a lot of money on, but you could always use help there. So for me, it's going to come down to the offense, just because you want to support Drake May. The defense is what it is. If he's losing in shootouts, I'm okay with that. You're still supporting his confidence. But if you go all in on the defense, going for like a Mason Graham here or something like that, I don't think that's good. So the conversation becomes, are we going Tet McMillan, the best wide receiver on the board, or are we going Will Campbell? So for me, I think it comes down to what's going to help the most of the offense for Drake May. Yes, it would definitely help pairing up Tet McMillan with Stephon Diggs, who we don't know what he's going to look like coming back from that injury. But you know what? They have younger guys that they drafted last year, and maybe they couldn't quite develop just because the team wasn't good enough, right, to support them. And if they weren't supporting Drake May, then obviously the wide receivers aren't going to have a great year either. So maybe there's space for them to grow. But at offensive line, if it's not there, it is not there. You cannot wait around on this. This is going to improve the run game and the pass game, obviously. So I'm going to go ahead and select Will Campbell. Guy can play all over the offensive line. So that's up to them to figure out. But I have the Patriots at 4, staying put and taking Will Campbell. Now up next, the Jaguars. Previously, I had them taking Mason Graham, and you see he is still here. But I want to have a further discussion about this because I've talked to some people who have floated some ideas around to me, and they mentioned how last year Byron Murphy fell pretty far into the teens, and he was the best defensive tackle in the draft, and I think he might even be better than Mason Graham was coming out. So although this is a need, and it was something I initially said I would do, I want to open my eyes to some other opportunities. So what else can they do? Well, I've established that defensive line could be a big need for them, and run stopping has been an issue, so Mason Graham made sense. But let's think for the offense. What was going wrong there? Well, they had Brian Thomas Jr., who was really good, but they let go of Christian Kirk, and they signed Diami Brown. So there is some answers there, but not really a true wide receiver 3. And then I think the offensive line could always use some improvement. So Armand Membu, looking at him right here, definitely could be a quality pick for them. But to me, I think about what Liam Cohen did with the Buccaneers last year. And I heard some people compare Tet to Mike Evans, and I don't think that's who he is, but he's definitely a jump ball wide receiver. And I just thought about how the Bucs had so many good wide receivers last year. They had Evans, Godwin, and then they also had he also had the last name McMillan. Jalen McMillan, I'm pretty sure he was a rookie. He ended up finishing really strong down the stretch, filling in the shoes of Chris Godwin. And I think having two really established wide receivers is pretty good already, but you're not sure that Diami Brown's going to work out. I'm pretty sure he's on a 1-year deal. So why not establish something for the future and have one of the best young wide receiver duos in the league and pair the burner Brian Thomas Jr. with the physical possession wide receiver of Ted McMillan. I think having these two definitely is another way you can help Trevor Lawrence. I think Christian Kirk, his inconsistency staying on the field was really hurting T-Law's ability to stay consistent in the passing game. And Ted McMillan, although he's a jump ball guy, he can kind of work his way inside. So if you want to shift Diami Brown outside and have Ted be like this big-bodied slot receiver, you can do that too. So I really like Ted McMillan here at 5 to the Jaguars. Still not 100% sold on the value, but for the need, I think that's a good pick. Now here at number 6, we got the Las Vegas Raiders, and, they've done a lot in this offseason. They've added Geno Smith. Pete Carroll's the new head coach. The defense is going to be back healthy and strong, so the culture seems like it could be establishing itself pretty well. They do have Brock Bowers at tight end, so they're good there, but their wide receiver core definitely needs attention, but the best wide receiver just got taken, so that's pretty unfortunate. But another need that they have is running back. Now, they do also need stuff on defense like corner and interior defensive line, but I'm not quite sure if this is where the value gets super tricky, because you could say Mason Graham and Ashton Genty is going to be the other option. I think the corners, they're all good, but I don't think they're worth the 6 overall pick, so they're out of the question. So like I said, we're looking at running back and interior defensive line, because wide receiver and corner is gone. So between Mason Graham and Ashton Genty, it just becomes really tricky. But for me, I think with all the investment you have on the defensive line, you gave Christian Wilkins a huge contract last offseason. You just paid Max Crosby, but your running back position has nothing there. I mean, Zamir White's there. They signed Raheem Mostert, but I think you really want a difference maker here, someone that you can lean on offensively. And I think for them, this is a pick I've made already. Ashton Genty is going to be that guy that Pete Carroll, with Geno Smith, can lean on offensively to chew up the clock and work well with the defense to hold those leads when they do actually have good defensive outings. Not to mention, you could use him in the passing game too, having him and Bowers both in the box. I think, having them going 2 different directions could be really confusing for defenses to prioritize. But in the end of the day, like I said, I've made this pick before. If you want more elaboration on it, I got Ashton Genty going at 6 to the Raiders. Now, up next, we have the New York Jets. And once again, I've had all of these teams just staying put, because I think they all know that there's going to be blue chip talent available to them. And for the Jets, this is once again another interesting spot for interior defensive line. They need someone next to Quinnen Williams, so Mason Graham, definitely someone I could look forward to. But it comes back to the quarterback. They have a new quarterback, and they have an offensive line that they're currently trying to get right after all these years. So there is 2 ways you could go about it. But with the drafting of Olu Fashanu last year, I'm not too sure that offensive line is exactly where I would want to go here. I mean, they do need a tackle, and Armand Membu definitely could be that guy. But they need offensive weapons. Some people would consider Shedeur Sanders here. I'm not going to. But that makes the conversation come down to Armand Membu and Tyler Warren. So really, really interesting conversation here. But like I said, you drafted Fashanu last year and passed on Brock Bowers. And the offensive line still wasn't good, and Brock Bowers was basically the best tight end in the NFL. These tight ends that are coming out as great prospects, they have a bad reputation because of Kyle Pitts. And I've even still planted my flag and saying that's been the Falcons' fault this whole time. They don't know how to use them. I don't know what's wrong with Kyle Pitts and the Falcons, but I think we've seen with Brock Bowers that, it's certainly possible, even on the Raiders, to make a tight end worth their pick. Now, for Justin Fields, he's got Garrett Wilson. He's got his old buddy from school. And we saw him in Chicago pepper DJ Moore with targets. But other than that, there wasn't a whole lot of consistency in the offense besides Cole Kmet. He really likes those big targets down the middle. And Tyler Warren would be perfect for that. This could help them in the red zone. He could help block for Breece Hall when they're running read option and things like that. And just be another element of creativity that they can add to this offense. You're going to want big tight ends in there when you're running with Justin Fields. So I think this is a good pick for them. Armand Membu would be another acceptable pick, and you'd have a tackle duo for the future between him and Fashanu. But I think Tyler Warren is a prospect that you just can't quite pass up. Although Armand Membu might be as well, I just think it's a little tougher to get the value there at tight end. So I'm going Armand Membu Tyler Warren here at 7 to the New York Jets. This is another pick I already made. And now this is a brand new pick right here. The Giants at number 8. And I have been asking for this. I have been asking for us to trade down for quite a while. And this is it's not a spot I had a whole lot of time to consider before I started preparing for this video, because I just was trying to find who would be that trade partner. I think it finally made sense for the Panthers. But now we're here at 8. We've acquired a later pick. Maybe we can use that at another position of need, like defensive tackle or something like that. But as it stands, the Giants' needs are, quarterback, but none of them are worth the pick here. I'm even still going to say Shedeur at 8. Probably not going to do it. Even though we did get some value, I think just after trading out when you had the chance to take them, I just think it looks bad. So no Shedeur Sanders. It's going to be interior defensive line. It's going to be, another corner would be nice because Banks very well might not work out. And then you look at the interior of the offensive line and just the future of it in general. It's starting to age. And then wide receiver 2, and then maybe an RB1. But really the only thing that seems like it's here and worth it for the Giants is probably offensive line and Mason Graham, because we do need that run-stopping defensive tackle next to Dexter Lawrence, much like the Jets. So we're faced with a very similar decision where it's blue-chip player, except instead of Tyler Warren, this time it's Mason Graham or Armand Membu. Now, we just signed Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. We've rebuilt the quarterback room, and I personally don't want a disaster season where we get fired because the offense is last in scoring per game. And I want a future for whoever this next quarterback is that we end up signing, whatever the young guy is, or if we acquire a more skilled veteran guy. I want them walking into a good situation. I think I'm really getting comfortable at where the defense is. I know the run stopping was really, really bad last year, but run stopping defensive tackle is a position you can find later in the draft. Whereas offensive tackle, there's teams who have managed to find gems late in the draft, but I don't think you want to bet your money on that for your future of your franchise. And I just think Armand Membu is too good to pass up here. For the time being, he can play guard over a guy like Van Roten. If Andrew Thomas goes down, you can swing him over to the left-hand side or move Illuminor over there. This, gives us more of a chance to also pump in Evan Neal to guard, or just have him be sort of a swing guy. I just really like the way this sets up the future for the Giants, because you got Andrew Thomas, JMS, and Armand Membu as one veteran and the 2, young guys moving forward, so that when Illuminor's contract expires, you can discuss whether or not you want to extend him. And then John Runyon, he's kind of in that Andrew Thomas age range where he's probably a little older, but, we'll have time to address that in a few years. So Armand Membu is going to be the pick here for me for the Giants at 8 after trading down. I think this is my dream scenario. We help the offensive line, but we don't have to reach and take the guy at 3. We get another pick that we can use to fill another one of our many holes on our roster. And this is definitely the ideal draft process for the Giants. Moving on to number 9, we have the New Orleans Saints. And although they have many, many needs, they have no money. And they're just in one of the worst situations in the NFL. And to me, even some of their great assets like Olave and Rashid Shaheed have had injury scares that make you wonder how long they're going to last in this league. Their offensive line suffered a ton of injuries last year. Their defense is aging. So it's just really tough to kind of find, a pick that isn't going to make you come back and go, oh, we should have taken this guy, or oh, we should have taken that guy. Now, for me, I want to look at the offense, because that's what's really been struggling. I know that they've had quarterback injuries, but their defense has played overall pretty well, I think. And to be honest, if their offense could put the defense in a better situation, I think it would be fine, right? Of course, they've had some of their blowout losses here and there, but it is what it is sometimes when you're a bad team. Everything just falls apart. So if I'm trying to just kind of make the best pick available to my team, help raise the floor, I'm going offensive line. I'm sorry, with all the injuries we saw last year, and we saw the drop off after the first 2 weeks. They were the highest scoring offense, one of the best starts to a season ever. After that, they suffer some injuries and they lose to the Eagles, scoring only like 12 points. And I get the Eagles' defense was really, really good, but it was a very dramatic drop off after those injuries. And I think either whether this ends up being depth or whether this ends up being, a starter for you, even though, a defensive player like Graham or Shamar Stewart could develop, next to guys like Cameron Jordan and things like that, I just think it's important to get this offense's legs back underneath them. So what I would personally do is go offensive line. And looking at the board, our best option here is Kelvin Banks Jr., and I think that makes sense. Moving on to our next pick. We have the Chicago Bears. And they're upset because the offensive linemen that I mocked them last time are not there. Will Campbell did not fall all the way this time. I think more appropriately, the value of them is that they're going to get taken sooner. And if I'm drafting for these teams, then I have to assume that the other team is going to do that. So now the Bears are left with an interesting decision. They have needs at like a second edge rushing spot. They need running back. Some people, like I said, we're still considering offensive line. I don't think Mason Graham would be a bad pick here, but I'm still looking at that second edge spot for them because, adding Sweat was good, but, other than that, they really don't have anything behind them. And I think a real pure edge rusher would be a really, really good addition for them. Of course, like I said, they could reach on an Omari and Hampton. They could go for like a safety like Starks, but I just don't think the value's there at safety and running back. I think you want to go with the defensive line here. And I think if they're going to do that, well, the best pure pass rusher, in my opinion, is still on the board. I mean, Mike Green had great stats, but when you look at the traits, James Pierce Jr. is going to be a great complement to Sweat. And probably one of the last picks this regime makes for like this defense, as they start off, because I think they're going to focus more on the offense. But I just think they kind of want to do this as insurance for the defense to make sure that they don't have to worry about it and they can throw the rest of the picks that they have at the offense to support Caleb Williams. I think they know what types of guys they like, and that when Ben Johnson was with the Lions, they were able to get contributors with their later round picks. So I think go ahead with the talent in the first round, solidify the rest of that defense, and fill one of the bigger holes and snag James Pierce Jr. Up next. This is a very controversial spot for me last time. I also had Shedeur Sanders falling here, and I had them taking Shedeur Sanders, and once again, he's here. But the draft board has fallen differently. This 49ers team is completely decomposed, like I said, and they need a lot of help in the trenches. They need corners, not just a new quarterback, like I said, with the Purdy situation. Now, I still think they're going to have to do something about this, but there are other quarterbacks in this draft, and I think there is a player here that can really fill a need for them. And although, his value's fallen from, where I had him initially going, some people are worried about his pass rushing skills and that he's just a run defender. Well, the 49ers really need somewhere to start. And I think if they can develop, if anyone can develop him into a good pass rusher as well, I would say the 49ers are the type of team to do that. So go ahead and improve your defensive trenches and finally solve that defensive tackle spot you've been trying to solve over years, signing guys like Hargrave and things like that, and it just not working out. Go ahead and draft one of your guys and get Mason Graham, who has fallen due to the value in the draft right here. I still think Shedeur Sanders is a really good pick here, but it's just kind of hard to pass up when you have an instant fill with, what's considered to be a blue chip player right here, falling to at 11. It's going to be really hard to pass up this value. Moving on now to number 12, and we have the Dallas Cowboys. And this is a very interesting spot. The Cowboys have a lot of needs, pretty much all over the entire defense. They need linebackers. They need another edge rusher. They need a nose guard so badly. DBs, offensively, their offensive line is going to be pretty new without Zach Martin. They need a running back. So there's a ton of stuff they can do here. And they just have so many needs and not so many picks. So I think this is a really, really good team that's going to want to trade down. Now, who on earth would want to move up to 12? Well, if you take a look at the up-and-coming teams and what their needs are and how that might scare another team, I'm looking at the Buccaneers, who have Levante David, who is very, very old and honestly surprised me coming back this year, since most of us thought he was going to retire, and within that Todd Bowles defense, those aggressive blitzing linebackers, running around with their hair on fire is a really, really important part of their defense. And I think a lot of these up and coming teams, even the Cowboys, would be willing to take a guy like Jihad Campbell, looking at him as the best, sure, immediate impact as a defensive player, and say, we need that on our team. So I think the Cowboys trade back with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Buccaneers end up moving up. So let's go ahead and get Dallas, and let's get the Buccaneers. Oh, come on. Don't do this to me. All right, so they're going to trade their first. And there we go. Sorry about that. The Buccaneers. There it is. They're going to go from 19. Let's just say they throw a second in there because it's not going to let me unclick it. But, it's going to be like a third or fourth round pick. They move up so that they can get their guys, since to me, this is a reason why it makes sense to me for the Buccaneers to move up. They do have some needs, like they could use a corner, like they could use a guy like Will Johnson. They could have maybe risked the biscuit and see if he fell to them. But I think there's a good chance that maybe Will Johnson and Jihad Campbell both don't make it to him there. So if they really want to get their guy and they think they are close to making an NFC championship or a Super Bowl, then you got to make a move like this to be aggressive and go get your guy, because you're further down the draft board than these other teams are who have those similar needs. So I think it makes sense for them to move up and get Jihad Campbell. And now the Cowboys get what they want. They get a couple extra picks that they're going to need to use on that defensive side of the ball especially, and maybe to get a luxury pick in there like a running back. So the Buccaneers trade up with the Cowboys and draft Jihad Campbell. Now, up next, we have the Miami Dolphins, and they are in cap hell. They have Tua on this contract, and, sometimes he's not even on the field. Same thing on the defensive side of the ball. Had a ton of players on contracts like Bradley Chubb go down, and this team has just got a lot of money invested in injury-prone players, and I just think they kind of need to start thinking about the future, which means it makes a lot of sense for them to trade back and get some more picks for them to start filling these holes on their roster, which is the holes aren't really holes. It's like they're filled with inefficient contracts. So you want to move on from those types of things. So who would want to move up with the Dolphins? Well, like I said, there's a lot of teams here who have similar needs on the defensive side of the ball, but none of them are more glaring to me than the Falcons, who last year notoriously passed on an edge rusher and elected to draft Michael Penix Jr. Well, now they moved on from Grady Jarrett. They need defensive tackle and they need edge rusher. For me, if you want to start building your defensive line, you got to start on the edge. It's harder to find. So we're going to have the Falcons move up just a little bit to jump ahead of the Colts, who also need an edge rusher, and the Dolphins, who could very well take one, because their guy is sitting right there and they're not going to risk letting someone else take them. So let's go ahead and find the Falcons. Atlanta, where are you? There we are, all the way at the top. And the Falcons are going to trade up with the Dolphins, trading first-round picks. And like I said, a third. Okay, that's too much for them. Let's throw in a fourth. And I just want this trade to happen. Come on. I wish it let me unclick this stuff. Yeah, whatever it takes, they move up to get their guy. And so now they're here, and they're going to go ahead with Mike Green, one of the most productive guys in college. He had some concerns with some character issues before he was at Marshall, but he's been behaving and out of trouble since then. So hopefully that's not an issue for them. But the Falcons are desperate, and they don't care, and they want the guy that's going to produce. Now the Colts, furious that Mike Green is now gone and out of their reach. Also really, really needing edge rusher, really, really needing corner, but to me, this is going to be a bit of a run on edge. I mean, you see that there are some defensive tackles like Kenneth Grant available. There's some DBs and safeties like Warren Starks. You got corners, Barron and Will Johnson are still there, but they spent a lot of money in the secondary over free agency. So to me, the need here, the priority one is definitely going to be edge, but the question more so is which one of these edge rushers is the best fit? It's all about taking the best edge rusher, the best fit for them. I think about Laiatu Latu and how he's a bit more that finesseful, skilled pass rusher, maybe not quite as strong, but still favorable against the run. Let's take a guy who's kind of a different skill set, who is meant to be primarily against the run. He's that 260-pound frame, but could develop into a very, very good power rusher as a nice complement to Laiatu Latu. So considering all the positions, narrowing it down to edge, and then narrowing it down to the best fit, I think Shamar Stewart is the best fit here for the Colts, should help with the tackling and the run defense. Moving on, we have the Dolphins, who traded down to this spot, trying to gain a little bit of value so that they could fill a couple more holes. And now, looking at the best defensive players available to them, you could have Michael Williams and Jalen Walker, but with how much you have to develop them and how much they have already invested into the edge group, I just don't think that makes quite as much sense as looking at the secondary. You have Ramsey, who you signed, a few years earlier, and he's definitely aging. And though you might think Will Johnson's the right clone for them of Ramsey, running that same scheme that they do in Baltimore, I think having someone with a bit more versatility in coverage is going to make a bit more sense. So that's going to direct us towards Jahdae Barron. Of course, you could look at the defensive tackles on the board, like Kenneth Grant, Walter Nolan, and things like that. I think those would be good picks too. But I'm just going to focus on the corner position because I think it's here. This is where the value starts to be there. And you could definitely find defensive tackles in the second round that you won't be able to find corners in. So I think Jahdae Barron is the pick here for the Dolphins. They trade down, they get some value. Maybe use one of those picks to help trade back up for a defensive tackle in the second or third round. So there you go. That's the Dolphins pick at 15. And the Cardinals are very happy. They also are in a similar position to the Dolphins, but not with the financial situation. It's much more about just kind of needing a lot of help on the defensive side, but most of it is in the interior of the defensive line. They do also need corners and whatnot, but the guy that they probably wanted just went off the board. So they're going to look at defensive tackle. Looking at the guys who are available, they could pick between Kenneth Grant, Walter Nolan, and Derek Harmon. Now, Kenneth Grant is definitely the better of the run-stopping, primarily defensive tackles, and Walter Nolan is sort of the pass-rushing specialist. But last year, they did draft Darius Robinson, who's much more of like a 3-tech, 4-eye kind of tweener, hybrid defensive end type, but he can kind of kick inside and be that pass rushing specialist for third downs in the interior, whereas they really have no one who can be a very high quality run defender. So I think Kenneth Grant is a really, really good fit here for the Cardinals. And also the next few teams, the Bengals, the Seahawks, and the Cowboys, also all would probably be interested in. So definitely wouldn't want to trade down from this spot. But as you can see, it paid off for them staying put because the defensive tackle that they wanted is still going to be there for them. And even if he wasn't, then they could go Walter Nolan or a Derek Harmon. And if they are all taken, then chances are an edge or a cornerback who I had previously taken would definitely be there. So I'm going Kenneth Grant here to the Arizona Cardinals. And moving on, we got the Cincinnati Bengals. Everyone knows they spent a ton of money on Chase and Higgins. Burrow's on a huge contract. They were able to re-sign BJ Hill, but we don't know what's going to go on with Trey Hendrickson. He may or may not manage to stay in Cincinnati. He could hold out. He could get traded. We really don't know, and they might not know until even after the draft. So for me, they got to prepare for sort of both situations, and I think there's a really, really good way to do that. There are edge players here on the board. Of course, they could go corner with a guy like Will Johnson, but for me, you want to focus on the trenches here. Especially when it comes to edge over defensive tackle. And your options are Jalen Walker, like I said, the tweener linebacker, Michael Williams, who's kind of like a less developed Shamar Stewart, Donovan Ezeraku. He's kind of like your fundamentally sound, shorter defensive end. And then Nick Scorton also has a lot of potential to be, kind of a handful as he's like 6'3", but very, very built. So he could be a good replacement. But I think Michael Williams is the quality guy that you're going to want here because if Trey Hendrickson ends up staying, that's your best case scenario. He can sit and learn behind him if he's not ready and learn from someone who is of a similar stature. But if he ends up leaving, well, I would hate to use the phrase throw him into the fire, but one of the fastest ways to learn is to just get out there and do it. Amarius Mims, someone they drafted for a similar reason on the offensive side last year, ended up getting in there, and he was able to perform pretty well. So I think doing a similar thing here with the Trey Hendrickson situation would be really, really smart way for them to move forward. Use your other picks in the draft at spots you definitely are going to need. But if this is something you end up needing, you are going to wish you addressed it in the draft. So Michael Williams at 17 to the Bengals. Moving on to the Seattle Seahawks, I really considered having them move up, but I thought they were in kind of the right spot to address their need. For me, it is so straightforward. Their defense is pretty well filled out. They got Kupp and JSN, so that's pretty good for wide receiver. But the offensive line, they're okay at tackle, but they desperately need interior offensive line help, maybe more than any other team in the league. And this has been a problem for years. And I think they've got the perfect spot to solve it right here. Tyler Booker is the highest rated guard in the draft. Some people think he's a second rounder, but that's mostly because he's a guard. If you really do believe that, then I think taking a guy like, Gray Zabel, who's, kind of played all over the offensive line, could be a good pick as well. So it kind of depends on who you like more. But Tyler Booker, he's coming out of Alabama. He's the best one for a reason. And I think having him go in as a solidified starter just at the guard position, not trying to figure out where exactly he fits, is just what they need. They just need instant improvement there, not trying to figure out where he fits in the case of Greg Zabel. So that's why I end up going Tyler Booker. And that's it's pretty straightforward. I mean, Sam Darnold, my one concern with him going to the Seahawks was they don't have good interior protection. For those of you who are watching the Week 18 game versus the Lions, the playoff game versus the Rams, as soon as there was interior rush, their entire offense completely fell apart. So I think it's really important for the Seahawks to make sure they don't end up with that same issue and not address the interior offensive line. Now, the Cowboys, probably a little upset at the past few picks. They really would have liked a Kenneth Grant as that defensive tackle to be that nose guard, maybe a Mike L. Williams to be the next DeMarcus Lawrence. And okay, well, we needed a new Zach Martin. Tyler Booker would have been that. Can you stop stealing our picks? Well, guess what? They got one more for you. They have another need. It's not just been that the Cowboys can't stop the run, right? Of course, it's a huge issue, but much like this next thing we're going to discuss, it's something that they could be able to do something about later in the draft. But they also haven't been able to run the ball either. And I think them picking up a running back here is something that's going to be long overdue. They could go defensive tackle. There are guys still there, the Walter Nolans, the Derek Harmons, but I don't think you're going to get quite as much of an impact out of them as you are going to be able to get out of a running back who can play all three downs, right? Whereas on defense, if he's a run stopper, maybe he becomes a liability on passing downs, and you don't really want that on your team. So for me, I'm going to go look at the running backs. The questions are between Hampton and Quinshon Judkins, since we're looking for a workhorse. Travion Henderson is a third down back. But for me, this is pretty straightforward. You can check out my top 5 running backs video if you want me to talk about this more. But Hampton is the guy in my eyes who is the best fit. I even did compare him to DeMarco Murray in my top 5 running backs video. So this would be very reminiscent of those days for the Cowboys, and I think they'd love to have him on the team and help bring back running the ball in Dallas. So the Denver Broncos, furious as I've been mocking them, Omari and Hampton all offseason, and now they have to double back maybe to something else. Their defense is pretty much entirely filled out. Some people might argue they need some edge depth, but I think they're going to be good there. Offensively, it's going to be all about adding a immediate impact wide receiver or running back. Now, there is a discussion about, the value, the positional value, and that wide receivers are more valuable. But the thing is that I think they have more answers right now at wide receiver than they do at running back. They have Audric Estime as a bit of a power back and Jaleel McLaughlin, but neither of them are even that incredible in their own roles so far from what I've seen. But for the wide receivers, you have Cortland Sutton. He's pretty good. And Troy Franklin, who went to college with Bo Nix and could develop as like a slot wide receiver. And then Marvin Mims was really coming on pretty strong, making big plays at the end of last year. So I think they might have enough pieces to work with right now at wide receiver, whereas with running back, I would say that was something that was more so holding them back. And so I'm going to be stubborn here. And I'm going to say that they still go running back. But they don't need Travion Henderson because, like I said, Jaleel McLaughlin is very similar in the sense that he's a pure receiving back. They need like a workhorse, someone who they know they can keep in on either down, and he's going to be able to get them either 5 yards with a carry or 5 yards with a check down. So for me, that's going to be Quinshon Judkins. He's also going to add an explosive element to their offense where the Cowboys do kind of already have that with CeeDee Lamb. I feel like the Broncos are really going to need it. They also have a really good offensive line to open up holes for him to burst through. And I think this could make them very, very dangerous in the playoffs with that defense, right? Having a talented running back who other teams can't stop. Very reminiscent of what the Eagles were doing. If these wide receivers can end up panning out, the Broncos are going to be nasty next year. So I have them going Quinshon Judkins, 3 running backs going in the first round. This is what I would do. Now for the Steelers, I mentioned for them that they are the last team that I think it really makes sense to think about quarterback in the first round. And they have other needs on the defensive line and offensive line, but they might not get another chance like this. Shedeur Sanders, a once, touted first projected overall pick, has fallen all the way down here to 21. As I have said, he is not worth that second overall pick or that third overall pick for those struggling franchises. I don't think he's going to be the guy to elevate you. But the Steelers, with that defense and with these wide receivers, DK and Pickens, adding maybe a running back later in the draft or some offensive line help, I think this is the perfect spot for Shedeur Sanders, much like the 49ers, where that's more of a scheme fit thing. I think the Steelers are definitely more put together than the 49ers are right now. They've been dealing with this quarterback situation too, where they don't really have a guy that they believe in. It was Russell Wilson and Justin Fields last year, Kenny Pickett before that. And although I give Brock Purdy a hard time sometimes, I would say he's probably better than all those guys. So I think the Steelers getting somewhat on that level would really help them compete in the AFC. I think you'd probably start right away. You're waiting on Aaron Rodgers. You don't want to wait on your quarterback to get to, your team right when OTAs start or something, and then he doesn't even show up to those. Just get someone in the building now, and maybe he can start right away. But if you do sign Rodgers, then boom, Shedeur Sanders gets to sit behind a Hall of Famer for the first year of his career, and that always ends up being beneficial for the quarterback. So I think this is pretty straightforward. Shedeur Sanders at pick 21 for the Steelers, great value, scooping up the second-rated quarterback all the way at pick 21. Up next, we have the Los Angeles Chargers. And for them, you see something here? You notice something? Who's the head coach of the Chargers? Oh, it's Harbaugh? Didn't he coach at Michigan? That's right. And what do the Chargers need? Well, they need corner, they need tight end, and they need wide receiver. So I have had Matthew Golden going here for a while, but I think he's going to have a hard time resisting himself here with 2 Michigan players sitting right here on the board. Now, I would really like to think that he would go Colston Loveland to add another pass catcher to, this offense, but losing Samuel, I think it really means that they're going to, want to replace that, and having a guy that he's familiar with on the defensive side of the ball in Will Johnson, that people have concerns about his, ability to run with NFL wide receivers. I think Harbaugh is going to know how to get him in the right situations and maximize his talent. So Will Johnson here at number 22 to the Chargers, I think that's going to be a really fun pick when it happens, if it does. And then moving on to the Green Bay Packers at number 23. And this is a pick that I've more so floated around the same position. We've discussed they have Rashawn Gary and Lucas Van Ness, so they're good at the edge group, but they definitely need help on the inside. They don't have that second spot filled out, so I'm going to be looking there. It was looking like they might need corner, but it looks like Jair Alexander is going to stay. Also heard talk about wide receiver, but I'm really not sure that these guys are going to be able to elevate amongst the guys who are there, like Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, if he even ends up staying healthy next year, Wicks and Dobbs. Dobbs very familiar with the situation, usually ends up playing a lot, but doesn't quite have the talent. Everyone's got an issue, right? So I think if someone were to make sense at wide receiver, it would be Emeka Egbuka, since he's got a very clearly defined role, slot wide receiver. Matthew Golden would make sense too, with the speed on the crossing routes to, make sure the offense is explosive. But you could say, oh, he might not be a great fit for the possession stuff. And Egbuka, it's like, is he explosive enough? Luther Burden, he's the perfect fit. He can kind of do both. But Jaden Reed, you already got a guy like him. So for me, that's how I come around to the conclusion of looking at defense. And there is some really, really good defensive players still on the board. You could have Derek Harmon to kind of plug up the middle, but I think getting some interior pass rush to make these NFC quarterbacks on these really good teams uncomfortable is going to be your key to making the Super Bowl. So I think this is a really great spot for Walter Nolan to go, who, although is not quite as powerful as Derek Harmon, his athleticism is crazy, and it does come through in his pass rushing reps. So Walter Nolan here at pick number 23 to the Packers. I think they'd be very happy with this. Oh, man. Now we got the Minnesota Vikings. And this is one that really hasn't changed too much at all. Malachi Starks, safeties don't have a lot of value in the draft. So, they end up falling right here into the Vikings' lap. But just let's go ahead and look at the other positions of value. Yep, all the corners are gone. Interior offensive line, they did address. Defensive line, they could maybe go Derek Harmon here. That would not be a bad pick. But for me, with Harrison Smith only, re-signing for one more year, you can have Starks as that extra safety who comes into the box, but just kind of travels all over the field. And once Harrison Smith is gone, much like Jahad Campbell and Levante David, Starks can replace Harrison Smith. Now, this is another pick that I've been making quite frequently. The Texans basically destroyed their offensive line, trading away Laramie Tunsil, who is like, if you're a Giants fan, basically their Andrew Thomas. He was the guy who was, holding it down, and if he gets hurt, it's really going to fall apart for them. And that's stuff that we saw last year. So you're looking at offensive line here. Well, Josh Simmons is really good, but he was injured, had a season-ending injury. So you don't want a rookie coming off of that being relied on to start on right away. That's definitely someone you're more considering kind of, sitting for a year, letting him fully recover and adjust to the NFL. Interior offensive line, Gray Zabel is here, and he could play all over the offensive line. So he is definitely someone you'd think is a good fit here. And then at wide receiver, when Nico Collins and everyone went down, of course it wasn't looking good, but when it was just Nico Collins as well, it seemed like they, didn't really have a reliable number two guy. So maybe a guy like Emeka Egbuka could make a lot of sense. Former, knows CJ Stroud from Ohio State. So that would definitely be something that could work and could be something that they need. They don't really have a defined slot wide receiver, but the fact is, if you don't have time to throw, it's not going to matter anyway. So I think they're going to go interior offensive line here and go with Gray Zabel, because he could play anywhere, but also there's a lot of teams that are very high on him. And like I said, I've just been making this pick a lot. So Gray's able to the Texans. Now at pick number 26, a lot of these playoff teams, I also want to mention, your draft strategy is a little bit different. You're not quite as much building to fill the holes on your roster. I mean, you are, but you're also concerned with who your competition is once you get to the playoffs. I mean, like, who is the guy stopping the Rams? Well, it's the Eagles. Okay, we need to be able to stop the run then. All right, so even though we might have another need like corner or offensive line, it's not going to matter how good our line is if we just can't even get the ball, because the Eagles, we just can't stop them from running. They did pick up Braden Fisk and Jared Verse last year for the defensive line, and they were both successful additions against the pass. Clearly, it hasn't worked against the run. They were not able to stop Saquon Barkley for the life of them. So to me, this is a perfect spot to go with Derek Harmon, who is still there since the Steelers took Shedeur Sanders instead. So the Rams get their one tech in Derek Harmon to try to stop Saquon Barkley. Up next, we got the Baltimore Ravens, and this is always a fun draft pick for me. I love watching the Ravens play football. They are a super exciting and explosive offense, and they just don't quite operate the same way as everyone else. So it's always very interesting. But for me, there's a lot of other positions where people say they need depth or they need the future, and the Ravens really do tend to kind of draft for the future, kind of like the Eagles do. So they probably should keep doing what they're doing. But for me, I remember that playoff game against the Bills, and I just go, man, if they had Zay Flowers, they would have won that game, right? But even with Zay Flowers, it's kind of inconsistent. So I'm definitely going to go wide receiver here. The question is who? Now, Emeka Egbuka could be a very reliable wide receiver for Lamar Jackson, creating that quick separation. That's not so much just like a drag route like Zay Flowers to get the run after catch. No, he can create separation and get open. But here's the thing. The Ravens are just different. They are. So he doesn't really do that drop back passing stuff quite as much as the other teams. So if there's a team where he's probably like the worst fit, I would probably say the Eagles and the Ravens. But Luther Burden, like I said, very similar to Jaden Reed, the run after catch. That's very, very good, breaking tackles and juking people out. But they kind of already have that in Zay Flowers. And Matthew Golden seems to be the perfect fit to me. Why? Well, he is a run after catch guy, but it's more so the burning speed, right? The getting open deep with Matthew Golden. Now, Zay Flowers can do that, but Matthew Golden ran in at 4.2. So that is a little extra scary. And just imagine, you're already worried about how you're going to, do your run assignments between Lamar and Henry. Who is he reading, right? Are we going to go for Henry and let Lamar keep it? Or no, everyone just crashed towards the line of scrimmage. And the next thing you know, Matthew Golden, Zay Flowers, and Likely are all screeching down the field, and all of your linebackers and safeties have been beaten by a step because they're all too worried about who's going to get the ball. To me, this Ravens team should have been able to win the Super Bowl last year. They were right there with the Eagles. They were competitive with the Chiefs week 1 before their offensive line even developed. They almost beat the Bills, who beat the Chiefs, and that was without Zay Flowers. They probably should have won that game if it wasn't for Mark Andrews dropping it. So I think a pick like this could win you a Super Bowl right here, and I think getting an explosive guy like Matthew Golden is a great way to do that. Up next for the Lions. This is a pick I've made pretty frequently, but let's just go over the needs and who's still there. The Lions definitely need help on defense. They just kind of need overall depth. I mean, it's not likely that they're going to suffer all the injuries that they did again, but hey, it doesn't hurt to be ready for it. Also, considering that they really don't have much other needs, they might need to, fill some holes and plug some holes on the offensive line and stuff like that, losing some players and whatnot. You could argue that they need another wide receiver. So I think Luther Burden could be very interesting here. Amon-Ra St. Brown is your slot wide receiver, and you've kind of got guys who have been that sort of vertical slot threat as well, like your Josh Reynolds and your outside threats like Tim Patrick. But Luther Burden would be that bona fide alpha guy. You can kind of get the ball, in his hands, on the run, and he could break a couple tackles, and they would probably love that about him. And Emeka Egbuka is a great player, but he's very too similar to Amon-Ra St. Brown that I'm just not sure it would make sense to get two of those guys. So I'm going to go ahead and look back at the defense because I think they can get role players on offense with better value. So I'm looking at the defensive side of the ball, and I'm thinking about what they need. Well, if they kind of need someone who can kind of contribute in a lot of ways, there's two guys I'm looking at here. And that's going to be Jalen Walker, who played off-ball linebacker and edge, and Nick Emenwari, who's kind of like a box safety, although he can play deep. So for me, it is really close, but I just think they have Brian Branch, and that's too close to what Emenwari would be. But what about Jalen Walker? What does he do? Well, for me, this is the way I see it. They have linebackers, but I don't think they have a linebacker like this who's so fast and is so effective as a QB spy and a blitzer that it can actually help them go toe-to-toe with these mobile quarterbacks that tend to give them issues. The Commanders and Jaden Daniels, the Bills and Josh Allen, the Ravens and Lamar Jackson 2 years ago. Their defense just can't handle these guys. But I think having a guy like this who can kind of, do his recon and just make sure these dudes don't flush out the pocket and go for 10-yard scrambles every play or, create enough time for open wide receivers. Even he's also got a good nose for, when quarterbacks are not going to press the line of scrimmage and they're just trying to buy time. He will go chase after. He's not going to just let you sit there. So I think adding a guy like this help you compete with, like I said, the Chiefs, all those AFC mobile quarterbacks. And now you got to worry about the Commanders. You got Jalen Hurts with the Eagles. So I think this would be a great pick. Jalen Walker to the Lions. Also, if Aiden Hutchinson, isn't 100% or goes down, you could just stick him on the edge too, right? Like he could fill a lot of holes. So that's why I think he's a good pick here. Not quite sure exactly which position you need. Go ahead and take the guy who can play a ton of them. Now, at number 29, we have the Washington Commanders. And for me, they could use some help on the offensive line. Consider guys like Donovan Jackson, Josh Simmons, who can kind of sit and learn. Josh Connerly. But for me, I definitely want to look at their defense, what happened last year against the Eagles. Definitely made me sad to see. They do have Darius Alexander. Maybe if they want help on the interior. They did bring in Kinlaw, so maybe they're not going to think about doing that. But looking at the edge, you got some players here who definitely are going to be worth the value. The question is, what kind of guys Dan Quinn going to like more? Well, he's going to like guys who are smart, and they know when they can get away with teeing off and when they cannot. And for me, that just screams Donovan Ezeraku. Now, Nick Scorton might be a little bit of a bigger defensive end, and that could also be something that Dan Quinn is going to want. But I think it's more so going to be the guys who they get sacks. They set you behind the sticks. And I think Ezeraku, being the smart player he is going to be well appreciated by Dan Quinn. And I think this is a great pick here. Moving on, we got the Buffalo Bills. And now this is a team that has been oh so close for oh so long. And for me, I think you could go either way. But honestly, these two picks, the Commanders and the Bills, I thought about wide receiver, but I thought Josh Palmer, Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman. Okay, they got their slot in Shakir, they got their X in Coleman, and they got their like number one in Josh Palmer. So they got to look at defense. So they're going to look at edge and corner, much like the Commanders were, and they're going to be stuck between Ezra and Nick Scorton. Now, Nick Scorton, like I said, it could have made sense because he might be a bit more of a talented pass rusher than Ezraku, but I just think, the fact that Ezraku is like this, such a high IQ player might make more sense, for the Commanders to take him. But like I said, these two picks could flip. I'm going Nick Scorton. If you couldn't tell, this was a little telegraphed from the way I started talking about it. But Ezraku and Nick Scorton, I've gone really back and forth, just really hampering on that. But both the Bills and the Commanders go edge, trying to stay competitive against these other elite quarterbacks in the playoffs. And now up next, this is a big pick right here. We got the Kansas City Chiefs. And in my last mock draft, I'm pretty sure I had them going wide receiver. And it ended up being Emeka Egbuka because I said, well, they might lose Rice and they might lose Worthy due to suspension. Rice is coming off an ACL. Let's immediately replace that slot wide receiver. But they have a ton of holes. They have holes on offensive line that they want to plug. Like I said, holes at wide receiver. There's movement on the defensive side of the ball. So I think this is a really, really good spot actually for them to trade down. But who on earth is going to come back up into the bottom of the first round? Well, it would be a team that wants a quarterback, but not only a quarterback they can give a fifth-year option to, a.k.a. a first-round pick. So you got to do it down here if you're going to trade up for another quarterback. The only question is, who is going to do it? Well, to me, it's not going to be the Giants. They've already invested a ton into quarterback, whereas the Browns have really only picked up Kenny Pickett, and it seems like they're kind of trying to pair him with someone. So I think what they're going to do is they're going to trade up with the Chiefs, just give up a little bit. So let's go ahead, pull up the Chiefs, pull up the Browns. They're going to swap these two picks, and let's just say the Browns throw in a fourth-round pick. Apparently that's too much for them. They trade those fourth-round picks. All right. So they've moved up. And which quarterback is it that they want? Is it Jackson Dart or is it Jalen Milroe? Well, it's Jackson Dart. Jalen Milroe is a developmental guy. And although I really, really like his upside, I think there would be far too much uproar for him to start over Kenny Pickett. And you wouldn't want to force him out there too early. But Jackson Dart, I think, really could compete with Kenny Pickett. But since they both are kind of passing heavy, if he's behind Pickett in year one, you can go ahead and let Pickett start and kind of let Dart learn until he's ready to take over, which is usually the best situation for quarterbacks. So Cleveland gets a number one wide receiver to pair with Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku. They do still need a running back. The offensive line needs to stay healthy. But now you've got Jackson Dart, Travis Hunter, and Jerry Jeudy. Njoku, that's pretty decent potential passing game for the future. So really like this pick here for the Browns. I got talked into it recently. I'm not a huge fan of Dart going in the first round, but just because of the value, if I'm the Browns, am I really going to allow myself to leave the first round without a quarterback I can give a fifth-year option to? Well, if I believe in them, this is what I'm going to do. So I don't know if they feel this way, but that's just what I have them doing. And now finally, we got the Eagles. And the Eagles, what are their needs? Nothing. They don't need anything. There's not like a single need. I mean, they could theoretically need guard because they lost Becton, maybe another edge rusher, but I know them all too well. They just can't help themselves. This is just going to be best player available. And fortunately for them, there is a best player on this board still available. It could be Emin Wari, but I don't think it's going to be him. For me, they always go to the trenches. And what was known as the best tackle in this draft before he had a season-ending injury, Josh Simmons is sitting right there. So why not, while you still have Lane Johnson looking, towards retirement in the future, and Mailata, who's, kind of in the prime of his career, pick up the future and just keep the ball rolling. You're always going to have this tackle duo. This is fresh off the Super Bowl. This is setting up for the new era. Get Josh Simmons on the Eagles right now, and he can go ahead and be your future tackle duo with Mailata for when Lane Johnson is gone. He's got time to recover from his injury. This couldn't be a more perfect situation. And you know what? Now you got better tackle depth if Mailata or Johnson goes down. I'm pretty sure Fred Johnson was the backup tackle before, who wasn't awful, but definitely not good. This would be far better. So Josh Simmons goes to the Eagles with the last pick in the first round. And that is going to conclude it. Real quickly, I'm just going to use my really ugly Google Docs to show you all the picks that I made in order. Number 1 overall was Cam Ward to the Titans. The Browns at number 2 overall take Travis Hunter. At number 3 overall, the Panthers traded up with the Giants to select Abdul Carter, who they gave a bit of a haul to in order to get up to. The Patriots at number 4 picked up Will Campbell to help the offensive line for Drake May. The Jaguars added Ted McMillan to make a nasty wide receiver duo for Trevor Lawrence between him and Brian Thomas Jr. Raiders picked up Ashton Genty to establish that run game for that Pete Carroll culture and make a dangerous running game with him and Bowers blocking and, coming off the play action. The Jets pick up Tyler Warren to make up for their mistake last year, not listening to me and not drafting Brock Bowers. The Giants, who moved down to 8, pick up Armand Membu and help the offensive line for this year and the future, and can use those other picks to address the other needs like maybe corner, defensive tackle, wide receiver 2. Saints at Kelvin Banks Jr., they're just really, really in a bad spot and just need to restart, add depth to the offensive line. You can't go wrong there. Bears add a nice compliment to Sweat and James Pierce Jr. as a very finesseful speed rusher. 49ers kind of start to rebuild their defensive line, starting with Mason Graham, kind of similar to when they took Solomon Thomas. So I see that being, very similarly telegraphed pick. If he is there, they're going to take him. Buccaneers trade up to 12 with the Cowboys and take Jihad Campbell to be the future linebacker for Todd Bowles and replace, kind of be the apprentice to Levante David. Falcons trade up with the Dolphins right behind them to make sure they get their guy at edge rusher since they passed last year. They need to make sure they get an edge rusher so they get their guy in Mike Green. Colts settle for Shamar Stewart as a nice compliment to Laiatu Latu. As a nice edge duo. Dolphins go ahead and take Jade Barron after trading down, acquiring a little bit of value as a nice corner to fit the versatility and coverage for that Ravens defensive scheme. The Cardinals finally add a nose guard so that him and Darius Robinson and the rest of this confusing Gannon defensive front can finally do their thing and stop the run. The Bengals plan for the future beyond Trey Hendrickson if he decides not to stay and draft Michael Williams, but he can also develop into a nice duo if Hendrickson decides to stay. Seahawks, just to make sure Sam Darnold is going to work there, they draft Tyler Booker so that they have their interior covered. Cowboys trading down. Although they missed out on the guard, the edge, and the nose guard, they're going to go ahead and get the second best running back in the draft and fill a huge need. The Broncos, furious, are stubborn and go ahead and take Quinshon Judkins, who's very comparable to Amarian Hampton. The Steelers are very happy to finally have an answer at quarterback as Shedeur Sanders falling just a little bit too far. They're not going to let that happen, and they take Shedeur Sanders as their future as a steal at pick 21. The Chargers bring in former Michigan corner Will Johnson back to Harbaugh, and he's going to help replace Samuel. Packers help their defensive line and pick up Walter Nolan to get some pressure on these NFC quarterbacks who have great running games and pass protection. The Vikings find their future, much like the Buccaneers, beyond one of their longest-standing veterans, Harrison Smith and Malachi Starks. They also run multiple safeties all the time, so he can play this year too. Texans moved off Laramie Tunsil, and they're going to need Greg Zabel to potentially play every position on the offensive line, so they're going to pick him up. The Rams draft Derek Harmon. The answer and mission is simple for them. Stop the Eagles and Saquon Barkley. So they need a nose guard if they're going to do that to play next to Braden Fisk. The Ravens, they need to add more explosiveness to the wide receiver room. So they do that, and they get the guy who ran the fastest 40 in this year's draft class in Matthew Golden. Lions add Jalen Walker as a QB assassin who's going to run QB spy blitzes and can kind of fill in on the edge just in case Aiden Hutchinson or one of their other edge guys goes down again. The Lions or the Commanders add Nick Scorton or Donovan Ezeraku. And same thing with the Bills. These two picks, like I said, they could easily be flipped. They're very comparable in value, in my opinion. Browns trade up with the Chiefs for Jackson Dart, as the Chiefs have many needs as they're entering this new era. So they will gladly take the picks, and the Browns get their guy, and they can give them a fifth-year option. And then the Eagles, just once again, getting away with it, getting one of the best players in the draft who's fallen for some reason due to injury, and they get to let him develop behind Lane Johnson and once again secure another couple years of having an elite offensive line. So there you guys have it. Thank you guys so much for joining me for Mock Draft Monday. If you did enjoy it, don't forget to drop a like on the video for your boy Scooter. I really appreciate it. And if you want to see more, you could always subscribe so that you don't miss the next mock draft that I come out with. I'll have a predictive one coming out the week before the draft. We'll have more top wide receiver video coming out, landing spots for those guys, for quarterbacks maybe. we got some more content coming out. So I'm excited to get that out to you guys. If you came this far looking for mock drafts, you must really be committed and looking for some out there takes. So kudos to you for being a dedicated football fan. But other than that, once again, I thank you all for joining me, and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace out.